Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes and hosted on MMAOddsBreaker.com. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts oddsmaker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 58 event, which takes place in Barão, Brazil. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 3 total bouts. Now, also pay special attention to our MMA Oddsbreaker staff picks article, which will come out following the weigh-ins about 24 hours before the event, and that's where we'll have any final predictions in case we make any last-minute changes. Now, briefly looking back at our last events, our premium package bets for the Ultimate Fighter 20 finale, UFC on Fox 13, and World Series of Fighting 16 went 2-1-1 overall to profit 2 units. We won our bets on Matt Mitrione from UFC on Fox 13 and Luis Gonzalez from World Series of Fighting 16, while we lost our parlay that included Beck Rawlings and Anthony Burchak. And we also had a push on a bet with KJ Nunes as his fight resulted in a no contest due to an eye poke. We also lost a 1-unit free bet which had a parlay of Henry Cejudo, who won, with Joe Ellenberger, who ended up getting TKO'd in the 3rd round. And for those interested, MMA Oddsbreaker Premium is having a special holiday sale. We have a 4-event package available for the price of 2. So great value. Get it while it's hot. It will only be available until the end of December. So you want to hop in while you can right now. Now back to the present. UFC Fight Night 58 features a 12-fight card in total. Let's dive right in. Now kicking off the preliminary card, we have a middleweight contest between Ultimate Fighter Brazil 3 finalist Vitor Miranda, who is 10-4, taking on Jake Collier, who is 8-1. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Collier minus 210, the comeback on Miranda plus 160, and right now looking over the line at 5 dimes, it is minus 155 for Collier, and the comeback is plus 115 for Miranda. Now, quick note, all lines are courtesy of 5dimes.eu, so that's who we're referring to, and they are the only place right now at the time of the recording that has the lines available for UFC Fight Night 58, the full card. So definitely, you know, if you don't have an account already at 5 dimes and you like some early lines, that's a place to go. So we are going to be quoting lines from these guys, and when other sports books come out, the margins will get a little bit tighter, and we'll see some action accordingly and kind of move a little bit. So if you see some off numbers from the recording to the actual numbers that are out there by the time you listen to it, that's probably why. So just want to explain that real quick. But right now, again, it's Collier minus 155. The comeback on Miranda is plus 115. So early action coming in on the underdog Miranda. Of course, he's the Ultimate Fighter Brazil vet. He fought and he made the finals at heavyweight. Against Carlos Antonio Jr., he ended up losing to, and that's, both the guys were at heavyweight, but there's a little asterisk beside that because neither one of them are really heavyweights. But that being said, this fight is back down to 185 right now for Miranda, which is a good division for him and where he really belongs. But it's a tough test for him. I think Collier is one of these guys that's kind of flying under the radar overall. He's definitely a talented fighter. He's more of a raw fighter, obviously, than Miranda. He has had some amateur experience and has had some professional experience, obviously, Collier, but Miranda's been in the game for a long time. Of course, he trains, actually. He's a trainer of many good fighters. We know that as well. So he's been around the scene for a while, and he's a true savvy vet, no doubt about it. He's very technical, and Miranda's just good. He's just a solid fighter. He's going to be a good test for Collier, but I think it's a test Collier ultimately is going to pass. Miranda, I think the best part of his game is obviously in the stand-up. He's a very, again, technical striker. He can do damage. He has knockout power on the feet. He's smart. He mixes things up well. Goes to the body when he has to. Counters when he has to at the right time as well. So his striking is really a thing of beauty to watch, definitely. I think it's a problem for most fighters middleweight for sure. But the problem with Miranda is sometimes he does get a little bit tentative and he lets aggressive fighters, again, push the pace and kind of dictate the tempo of the fight. And that's exactly what Collier is. He's an extremely aggressive fighter. Collier is the former RFA middleweight champion. He's a very athletic, heavy-hitting striker overall. He does have a well-rounded skill set. I mean, he does take the fight to the floor when he has to. He's shown decent takedowns and ground and pound to go along with it. His takedown defense is a little bit spotty. He can get put on his back and controlled a little bit, but overall he manages to get top position when he is on the floor. And standing up even in the clinch, I love, the way he works his clinch game. I mean, devastating knee attack, has a lot of power, and he has that killer instinct as a fighter. He's a finisher. That's what I really like, Collier, because he's definitely a fun guy to watch fight. So he's a talented guy, up and coming guy. He's fighting a more technical fighter, a fighter with a lot of problems for most people, especially, like I said, in his weight class. But I think, it's going to be Collier's fight to win or lose, because I think he's going to be the aggressor. He's going to be the one pushing the pace. Both these guys have a tendency to slow down a little bit as the fight goes, and the cardio advantage is going to be pretty close, but you got to give a slight edge to Miranda, I think, overall, as far as pure cardio. But I think Collier's still going to have enough gas left in the tank that he's probably going to win at least 2 out of 3 rounds, if not all 3 rounds. So, I believe that his aggression could possibly cause a stoppage here as well, because Collier, again, has that killer instinct. I think, he could find an opening and maybe put it on Miranda and be the first one to knock him out. If not, though, I think, again, he could probably win on the card. So I'm going to go with Collier here. I think there probably is some value as the line drops. I mean, at minus 155 now, I do believe there's some value. We could see the line tighten up a little bit more as we get closer to fight time, and there could be possibly even more value on Collier. So I think instead of dog or pass, it is a favorite or pass situation. Again, not an easy fight, so it's nothing you can go tremendously crazy about out there, but I do think that Collier wins this fight.
And I completely agree. Collier just has a little bit more to offer at this point in his MMA career. Now, Miranda is a really good kickboxer, but he really needs to thrive at distance. And the way Collier fights, I really don't see him getting a lot of opportunities to strike from distance, because Collier puts so much pressure on his opponents. And as you saw in the last fight for Miranda, he had a lot of pressure put on him by Carlos Jr. He got pushed towards the fence repeatedly, backed up by some aggressive striking, and then either taken down or beat up along the fence. And I really don't see a lot of things happening differently with this fight against Collier, because Collier's the same type of fighter. He really pushes the pace, he gets in your face, and he either gets you against the fence and starts unloading knees, or he tries to get it to the ground, and his wrestling is decent enough that he would probably get top position against Miranda, and his ground game is pretty legit. I mean, he is still definitely a work in progress. He's a lot more raw, but, so was Carlos Jr. Carlos Jr. was like 3-0 or 4-0 heading into that fight against Miranda, and he, lit him up. So, also with Miranda having some issues with Carlos Jr.'s size in his last fight, Jake Collier is actually an inch taller than Carlos Jr., and he's probably just as big physically, because Carlos Jr. cut like 3 pounds to make, or would have had to cut 3 pounds to make light heavyweight. And I bet by the time that Collier actually steps into the octagon, he's going to be weighing over 200, 205 pounds. So, he's a big boy. And Miranda, I think, even though he's dropping down 2 weight classes, it's not going to be too much to his benefit, because he's not exactly a monster middleweight. Now, the 10-year age gap is also huge in my opinion. So Miranda's definitely been put through the ringer a lot longer. He definitely will not have as strong a chin as Collier. And the only thing that he really has going for him is if he can somehow turn this into a technical kickboxing fight, he might be able to win it, but I don't see Collier playing that game. Or if he can weather that early storm and Collier comes out way too hyped up and aggressive and, the adrenaline surge, if he runs out of steam, maybe Miranda could outlast him. But I don't see it happening. I see Collier dominating this fight pretty much from start to finish. He's a little bit better and more aggressive in all areas. And I think that his aggression will make up for any technical deficiencies. So I'm definitely all aboard Jake Collier. Now, dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Marcio Alexandre, also known as Lyoto, who was 13-1, taking on Tim Means, who is 21-6-1 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Means minus 290, the comeback on Alexandre Jr. plus 210. And right now there has been some movement on this fight. It's minus 260 for Tim Means, and the comeback on Alexandre Jr. is plus 180. So dog action coming in early on. I'm a little surprised because, I mean, Tim Means is obviously the more popular fighter, the more hyped fighter, but it is an interesting style matchup, no doubt about it. Alexandre Jr. has that karate style that, fits to many fighters. I mean, he's far more technical. He definitely utilizes angles well. He's got a little bit of knockout power to go along with it, so he's no slouch on the feet. I mean, usually Tim Means has a reach advantage over most. The reach is going to be fairly even here as well, so I guess I can understand some dog action because this is kind of a weird spot overall. But honestly, I mean, Means is the aggressor. If we were just talking about Collier, what kind of finisher and that killer instinct that he has, Means is along the same line. I mean, the guy is definitely a little bit underrated. I mean, if you stand and bang with this guy, he's the kind of guy that can take the punishment and just dishes out even more so. So I think Means has some advantages in this fight because he's going to have the aggression on the feet, even though Alexandre Jr. might be the better counter striker and the more technical striker. I think Means is going to push the higher pace, and he hits with some serious power when he does land as well. And a lot of fighters just kind of tend to fold and crumble under that pressure that he puts on him. I think Means has a little bit of underrated, wrestling game and grappling game as well. Now, of course, his sub defense is a little bit questionable, and his takedown defense continues to improve. But offensively, I think Means can mix things up better than Alexandre Jr. as well. So I think Means is overall the better, talented fighter. He's got more ways to win this fight, and we're really, Junior is probably going to let Means push the pace again, maybe get caught up against the cage a little bit, let Means dirty box and do some damage there. And I think Junior's going to have to keep his space correctly and look to land some of those counter shots and maybe rock Means or put him out that way. So that's the way I see Junior winning this fight and pulling out the upset. But besides that, I really do believe, I mean, both these guys like to stand and bang, and Means against other strikers, I mean, if you look at some of the matchups he's had, he's fared relatively well. It's the guys that end up taking him down, controlling Means, and grinding him out that seem to be his kryptonite. And Junior is just not one of those guys. So a kind of a tricky spot again, to bet as far as, trusting the line and trusting where it's at right now. But I do think that it's kind of a Tim Means fight, win or lose. As far as the betting angle goes, I think you either pass it or kind of bet Means is what I'm trying to say here. So I don't think there's value on the dog in this spot. I think more times than not, Means should win it. Now, there is a little side note. Alexandre Jr. is dropping down to 170, which is a better weight class for him as well. He was fighting up at 185, obviously, for the show. So he's going to bring some power down with it. And again, there's just an interesting spot here in this fight. And it's definitely a fight that makes you scratch your head and think maybe I'm underestimating Jr. a little bit, but I don't think so. I think more times than not, Means should win this fight.
And I agree. Means is just a little bit nastier, in my opinion, with his fighting style. He's very aggressive, is a pretty good boxing overall, and he has a lot of power. Alexandre, on the other hand, he's more of that elusive, stay back, use that karate style. That's why he has that nickname Lyoto. But there's a lot of things about his game that is not Lyoto-esque whatsoever. He doesn't have nearly as good of takedown defense. His wrestling isn't there at all. Not that Tim Means is going to be taking advantage of that. And then he doesn't gauge distance nearly as well as Lyoto Machida, or he's not as accurate, and he doesn't have that power to catch you napping and get that knockout. I think in this fight, he's going to be very hittable because Means is going to be putting a lot of pressure on him. He's going to be pushing forward, and Means is very aggressive. He's going to hit you with all kinds of things. He's not just a pure boxer. I mean, he had some vicious knockouts in his little brief run outside the UFC trying to work his way back with some spinning back elbows and spinning back fists. And, he can really, really hurt you if he connects with anything. Tim Means is a very powerful, very dangerous man. And as Nick mentioned, one of the only ways to really beat him is to mix it up, to work in the submission game, work in the wrestling game. And Alexandre doesn't do that at all. So, really, unless Alexandre can keep his distance and work his kicks and try to pick Means apart, then Means is going to, get inside, land heavy shots, and I can see him knocking him out at some point, potentially. So, I definitely feel like this is Tim Means' fight to lose, and we'll find out what happens on Fight Night, but at this point, I'm definitely picking Tim Means. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims, we have Leandro Issa, who is 12-4, taking on Yuta Sasaki, who is 18-1-2 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Sasaki opens minus 405. The comeback on Issa plus 285. And right now it's minus 420 plus 300. So just a little bit of parlay action coming in on Sasaki early on. Not surprising, man. What a bad matchup this is for Issa. I mean, I understand that both of these guys actually prefer to grapple and, and control the pace of the fight on the mat and submit people. That's what they do best. So stylistically it should be kind of competitive, you would think. But you know what? Sasaki, I mean, he's a younger, fresher fighter. He just keeps on improving his overall game. He's got several advantages in this fight, and I don't think Issa is going to be able to take advantage of what he normally does against most opponents. I mean, he was fortunate to come up with a way over win Issa in his last fight, to come back and win that fight against Torsion. I just don't think he's going to have that success against Sasaki. Sasaki's definitely a hard guy to submit, and on the ground, I actually give him the submission edge as well. Now, standing up, obviously, Sasaki's going to have a reach advantage overall, so that makes things interesting as well. He's a southpaw. Sasaki's definitely the better striker. He mixes things up better. I think he can be more effective, has a little bit more knockout power, and he goes for it. I mean, again, he's the better fighter because he keeps on improving his overall game, where Issa's a little bit more, you know what you're getting with him, and he's okay. He's almost like a gatekeeper role for 135, where Sasaki's actually a contender eventually. So, that's the difference between these guys here, and I think Sasaki's going to probably make quick work of Issa. If not, if it hits the scorecard, Sasaki should win that way as well. But I think along the way, even though I do respect Issa, I mean, he's definitely a talented fighter. Again, I think he's more of the gatekeeper guy, and Sasaki's more of the contender. So I think Sasaki has more advantages in this fight. He could probably win this fight by finish, and I think he will along the way. So my pick is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, he's a high favorite for a reason, but I do think he's going to come through as Sasaki.
And I completely agree. Sasaki has so much more going for him in this fight. He is younger, he's faster, he's much better in terms of striking, he's longer, he's everything. And Issa, as you saw in his first two UFC fights, you know, obviously he didn't look so hot in his UFC debut. His last fight even, against Torsion, he was losing the first two rounds of that fight against somebody that just is not a UFC caliber fighter whatsoever, and was able to pull out, a last round submission victory when he needed it. So, that was a good thing that he had that heart on display. But against somebody like Sasaki, who is one of the best rising prospects, probably one of the best prospects other than Kyoji Horiguchi out of Japan right now, I just don't see how he can go in there and get this win. Issa is very vulnerable on the feet. He is not a good striker at all. He kind of just wings punches, very sloppy in the stand-up, while Sasaki is hyper-aggressive. I mean, he flew out of the gates against Roland Delorme and tried to land a flying knee in the first second, and I wouldn't be surprised if he tries it again. So, I mean, maybe Sasaki can be a little too reckless and walk into something, but Issa doesn't have a lot of power, so it's probably not going to happen. And in terms of wrestling and on the ground, I really feel like Sasaki is going to be able to scramble and work on the ground much better than Issa. Issa doesn't have very good cardio either. So honestly, it's going to be a really, really tough situation for Issa to go in there and do anything. I really see Sasaki outworking him in all facets of mixed martial arts. He's going to outpoint him. He's going to outstrike him. He's going to hit harder, and he might even be able to submit him like Russell Doan was able to do after Issa slowed down after the first round. So, this is absolutely Sasaki's fight to lose, and I'm not going to talk anymore about it because Sasaki is going to be my pick. Now moving up to the featherweight division, we have Darren Elkins, who is 19-4, taking on Hakran Diaz, who is 21-3-1. Now Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, here's a bad line alert. I opened Elkins minus 130, the comeback on Diaz minus 110. And right now, at the time of the recording, now again, these lines are relatively fresh, so we're going to see some adjustments and some changes, and the line will probably tighten up and come back down to reality some. But at the time of the recording, it's minus 190 for Diaz now, and the comeback on Elkins is actually plus 150. So early action definitely coming in on Diaz. A lot of people believe Diaz is going to beat Elkins. And I'm a little bummed out because I was thinking actually that the line might go the other way and Elkins might get some of the general public support because, I mean, I think he gets more respect from the general MMA community. But obviously, the early action here and the people that grabbed that line at minus 110, laying some juice still on Diaz, I think they were smart. I think it's really the right side because matchups are everything. And the way Diaz matches up against Elkins, I don't think fares too well for Elkins, to be honest with you. I mean, both these guys are known for their wrestling, their grinding styles, but I really believe that Diaz, he might actually be the better wrestler here in this situation. At least he has better takedown defense. Elkins has been put on his back before, and I think Diaz might be able to sneak a couple takedowns along the way. It's going to be tough because Elkins' grinding style, I mean, he pushes forward, tries to smother you against a cage, and does his thing. So it's not going to be easy, but I do believe that Diaz will have some success in the grappling department even against Elkins. And if it does stay standing, I mean, if these guys neutralize each other out on the ground, I think Diaz has the advantage in the stand-up game. He's still a little raw, but he's developing his skill set. And I think his stand-up continues to improve fight by fight. So, I really believe that it's Diaz's fight to win or lose, honestly. As long as he doesn't let Elkins just be that much more aggressive and push and control the pace the whole time, I think that Diaz, especially being in Brazil, it's not going to hurt his chances. Diaz is probably going to come away with a win here. So my lean is Diaz, and I do think there's some value on Diaz. It depends on the line. So if the line drops back down to reality a little bit, I think, there could be, some bets to be made on Diaz as well. So congrats to all of you guys that came in early at 5 dimes and, snatched up that line. I'm a little surprised, but I think you guys are on the right track.
And I'm in complete agreement. The main thing here is, Darren Elkins is so good at being very aggressive, putting a lot of pressure on his opponents, wearing them down, grinding them out, and eventually getting the takedowns. And then, as his opponent fades, he takes over. And I'm not quite convinced that he's going to be able to do that against Diaz, because Diaz is actually, a Brazilian featherweight with very good wrestling. And when Elkins is trying to implement that game plan, Diaz could turn the tables on him. Diaz could take Elkins down. Elkins' takedown defense is not that good when they're standing. If Diaz just decides to keep it on the feet, Elkins is definitely hittable. His striking defense is not even close to as good as Diaz's. Elkins has a little bit of power. Neither guy has a great chin, although I think Diaz is a little bit better. And, on the feet, Diaz should be able to be the more accurate, high-volume striker, while Elkins is going to be winging a lot more punches and missing, but just trying to close the distance and get this fight to the fence or get it to the ground. And Diaz's takedown defense and wrestling are probably going to save the day for him here, especially being at home in Brazil. We saw Elkins have a lot of trouble in his last fight against Lucas Martins trying to get the takedown, but he put enough pressure on Martins and pressed him into the fence enough that he was able to grind out a decision. Although one judge actually scored it 30-27 the other way because, it was a really, really ugly, ugly performance. And this time around, he's not facing just a pure striker like Lucas Martins. He's facing a good grappler, and I don't see him being able to push Diaz into the fence for 3 straight rounds. And I think Diaz turns the tides on him at some point, gets Elkins on his back, and I think it's Diaz's fight to lose. So I definitely believe in that, the early public support for Diaz. So I'm going to pick him. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I think I'm in agreement. I mean, it is pretty close on paper, and that's how the lines did open. And there is some stylistic contrast here. Elkins has definitely been a grinder. His stand-up game looks a lot like people like Chael Sonnen, who are wrestlers first, and they use their hands to set up their wrestling. So Elkins, his accuracy is very low. His defense isn't even all that great. But it's his volume that has been very, very high. So he definitely throws volume, gets people moving backwards, and that helps him set up his takedowns. And so on the mat, he's been very, very effective. He's been in control 80% of the time, advances position well, just attempts a lot of takedowns, even though his takedown accuracy isn't all that great. He definitely goes for it and repeatedly, and he ends up in top control, and he goes for submissions as well. So the ground game is definitely his strength. He's been that grinder kind of guy. Hakon Diaz, what sticks off this page is that defensively, he is very sharp. Not just in striking, he avoids strikes well, although he has been knocked down once. But also defending takedowns. He's had a lot of people try to take him down, and his takedown defense is nearly 80%, which is very, very high. Even though we only have 45 minutes of data, that's a lot of takedown attempts. So if he can keep this standing, let his hands do the work. His hands have been very accurate. So he has good avoidance, but also good accuracy. So in terms of technical exchanges, Diaz definitely has that advantage. So as long as they're standing, his precision versus Elkins, in terms of power and volume, I think it's Diaz that wins those points, but he does have to stay off his back. And he's probably not going to get submitted by Elkins. I think there's, he's experienced enough there as well, but it's enough to make me lean towards Diaz. Diaz is one of those guys I want to see him fight a little bit more before I really form a strong opinion of him, but it's close on paper, but there is definitely a lean towards Diaz.
Now sticking with the featherweight division, we have Tom Ninaki, who is 21-7-1, taking on Renato Carero, who is 8-0-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Ninaki minus 140 to come back on Carero, even money, and right now it's basically a little bit of action coming in on the dog, but it's basically the same line. It's minus 130 right now for Ninaki. The comeback is plus 110, but it kind of tightened up a little bit. The line has been out a little bit longer than some of the rest of the ones we were just talking about. So, line staying relatively steady with a little bit more action coming in on the dog, and I think that's probably the right case. Now, it's a tough fight because Carero, of course, he's a replacement fighter. He's replacing Hani Jason in this fight, so he's taking the fight on short notice. And he's a ground specialist, is what he is really. And that kind of most of the time is good for a guy like Ninaki because minus the 2 submission losses he's coming off to, which are a bit of a surprise, Ninaki has a pretty good ground game. That's what he excels at the most. So, this is an interesting fight because Carero is, again, kind of more of a ground whiz than he is anything else, but he's a young up-and-coming fighter. He's only 24 years old, and he continues to improve his overall skill set. It's pretty impressive and fun to watch him fight because even on the feet, Carero, I think, has an advantage over Ninaki in this spot for sure. He's a little bit longer, and I think he could be a lot more effective because he mixes things up better, and his kicks and his punches are a little bit more fluent. Ninaki looks like he is a little bit older on the feet anymore. I mean, he looks like he's a little bit slower, more hittable. You can kind of see his punches coming, so he's a little bit predictable there as well. So on the feet, I think even though, again, Carero is a grappler, he has a big advantage standing. Now on the ground, it gets interesting a little bit because Ninaki is the type of guy that looks for takedowns and wants to get this fight to the floor. Carero, a lot of similar things going for him in that aspect as well. But I think even if Carero gets a takedown here, Ninaki will probably end up getting top position and might control and kind of grind his way to a decision win here. That's the dangerous point or part about betting this fight because I think there's more of an upside to Carero for sure, especially with Ninaki. I mean, like I said, he's been submitted twice against Skelly and Backstrom in his last 2 fights. And before that, he was against Yaya, which is a better submission fighter than both those guys. And he was able to survive some tough positions there. So it's a little bit weird. I think that those losses for Ninaki, those submission losses actually don't speak enough for him. I think he's better than that. They were almost a little bit flukish. But losing back to back, I mean, how much of a fluke could that be? I understand that way, but still, I think Ninaki, what I'm trying to say, is a little bit better than that. And Carero, more times than not, probably won't submit him. Now, if Ninaki gives up his back like he did against Skelly right away, then it's a possibility for sure, but I don't think, that's gonna happen. I think it's gonna be one of those cases that Ninaki is in just a war with Carero. I think Carero is gonna be able to hang in there with him the whole time and make things definitely competitive. But right now, I'm slightly leaning a little bit more towards Ninaki. I'm going to wait till the weigh-ins and see, and I could easily switch my pick over to Carero because I think, again, he's a younger prospect. He just continues to get better and better, and I think this is a good fight for him because he's going to be relatively competitive in all aspects of the game, and he'll have some advantages here, too. So, Ninaki, again, the concern is he is getting a little bit older. He's had a lot of fights throughout his career, so we could be seeing a sign of a decline, and that's why he's been getting caught the last couple times. If that's the case, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Carero comes through here. So, not an easy pick for me. I'm going to slightly lean towards Ninaki because, again, I think his experience and his grinding style should come through in this fight, but I could easily change my mind. So make sure you guys pay attention to the MMA Oddsbreaker staff picks for the official pick, but right now I'm leaning towards Ninaki to win the fight.
And this will be the first time I disagree with you, Nick. I just really think that Carero has the edge here. The only thing that scares me in this fight, the only thing whatsoever, is the fact that it's short notice. We've seen, multiple times, time and time again, that a guy taking a fight, making his UFC debut on short notice, hasn't fared incredibly well. Making your UFC debut is fine, but the short notice ones are definitely tough. A lot the late weight cuts and everything. So the pressure's definitely going to be on Carero to come in there and make something happen early, and maybe Ninaki could take over if he doesn't. But honestly, Carero is the better striker. And on the ground, I think it's a bit of a wash. Maybe Ninaki has a little bit better wrestling, as Nick mentioned. He might be able to take top position. His scrambling's usually pretty good. but you gotta be scared with the way that Ninamaki's been submitted in his last 2 fights, because it happened pretty quickly. And that's just shocking to me because of how well he performed in his UFC debut against Rani Yahya. We actually had him in premium for that event, and we were really pleased with his results. And since then, he has just looked terrible against both Blackstrom and against Chaz Skelly in his last fight. So something is definitely wrong with Ninamaki. I don't know if it's a decline, if he was fighting injured, if he's just being careless with his submission defense, because he should not be getting submitted this easily. So that's a huge red flag. And so it's tough to get a read on it. But if Carero is able to keep this fight standing, he's definitely got enough talent on the feet to make something happen. He might even be able to knock Ninamaki out. Ninamaki definitely got hurt by Blackstrom in that fight. So it could totally happen. And on the ground, it's a very dangerous fight for both guys because they're both very solid grapplers. Although Ninamaki does have a little bit more experience, but with Carero, the guy is definitely a really strong up-and-coming talent. One of the better Brazilian prospects that hadn't yet been signed by the UFC. So it's great to see him inside the octagon. Ninamaki is going to be a tough first test for him, but I really think he's going to be able to pass it because, in my opinion, Ninamaki's on a bit of a decline. Something definitely is not right with him, and Carero has some physical advantages in height and reach and everything, and he's got that youth on his side as well. So I'm going to side with Carero, and the only thing that's making me not 100% with it is the short notice, but I am picking him. So moving on and moving up to the light heavyweight division, we have Marcus Rogério de Lima, otherwise known as Pazao, who is 12-3-1, taking on Igor Picots, who is 25-11 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened to Lima minus 270. The comeback on Picots plus 190. A lot of us were surprised to see Picots still on the UFC roster. It's funny because I know that I talked to some of the guys from MMAOddsBreaker, and we all kind of felt the same way, like, wow, surprising that he's there. So to me, this is obviously kind of a setup fight for the UFC, for De Lima here, but, getting right back into the line. De Lima has had some early action. It's minus 290 now for De Lima. Comeback is plus 210 on Picots. So a little bit more support coming in De Lima's way, but nothing substantial, obviously, early on. But it is his fight to win or lose, I think. Picots, I have respect for the guy. He's definitely a veteran of the sport. And he's had some impressive spots in the UFC, believe it or not. I know he's on a little losing skid here, as of late. And of course, he's aging, and that's not going to help his case at all. But overall, the guy's a pretty solid fighter. He's dangerous kind of in all aspects of the game. He's got underrated wrestling. He can knock you out on the feet. He can submit you a little bit, but again, defensively, he's flawed. He's been knocked out several times, so his chin's a little bit questionable. He's been subbed before as well. And, he does tend to fade as the fight goes on at times too. So Picots definitely has some flaws in his game. And with the time off, he hasn't fought since November 2013, since his KO loss to Cavalcante. So that doesn't sit well, in my opinion, either. And he's fighting another guy that has a ton of power, has a little bit of youth on his side. Lima, I believe, is 29 years old too. So he's under 30. He's the younger, fresher fighter overall. He's got a ton of power. And De Lima, it seems to be improving a little bit, and he has to be a little bit more confident now. He's been around for a while too. He's got a pretty solid or impressive resume overall, but mainly he's a tough 3 Brazilian vet. And actually he was Sonnen's first pick on the show. But he did again lose to Antonio Carlos Jr. By submission in the semifinals, so that's how he lost his spot in the Ultimate Fighter Brazil. But overall, he's a big, strong, athletic fighter. And again, he's got more of a striking base, and he's utilizes it pretty well. The guy's got 9 knockouts for a reason. He's definitely capable of knocking you out with a kick, with his hands. And he's aggressive. He's aggressive when he wants to be, and that's more times than not. So I think what we see here, Picots is going to have to kind of look to take this fight to the floor, or at least pin him up against the cage. And I'm not sure if Picots is going to be able to bully De Lima. I think it's going to probably be the other way around. And De Lima, I think on the feet, he's going to end up landing enough damage to probably end this fight. If he hits the scorecard, it's going to be interesting because it'll probably be a close fight because both these guys are going to tire out as the fight goes on. But again, I think you got to give the slight edge, especially being in Brazil and with the time off, to De Lima across the board here in this fight. I think he's a more capable fighter. And you know what? I honestly think that UFC's probably feeding this guy a bone. I mean, Picots, there's no upside to him right now. I mean, remaining on the UFC roster, I hate to say that. I don't want to be a fighter basher or anything like that, but it's the truth. I mean, you feed Picots to a guy that could potentially make some waves in the light heavyweight division. I don't think he's going to be a huge title threat to Lima, but still, he's a popular fighter amongst the Brazilian hardcores, and I think that there's more upside to Lima for sure. So I think the UFC is feeding De Lima a bone here and Picots, and I think it's a fight that he's probably going to win. So my official pick is going to be De Lima. I think he probably ends this fight.
Yeah, and I'm in complete agreement. De Lima is just a little bit better than Picots just about everywhere. I mean, you got to remember, it's been forever since Igor Picots won a fight. If you take away that no contest, which Joey Beltran lost due to, having a marijuana in his system, Picots is 0-4 in his last 4 fights, and on top of that, he hasn't fought in the last year, so he's gonna come in rusty and on a 4-fight losing streak, against a guy that at one time was one of the more hyped up light heavyweight prospects. De Lima is very dangerous. He has very heavy hands. He has a pretty good submission game. As Nick mentioned, the one thing to be worried about is his defense isn't the best. He can eat shots. He has been knocked out in the past. So that is a concern, but at this point in Picots' career, I'm just not quite convinced that he's going to be able to offer anything that's going to be a big threat to De Lima. Picots doesn't have a ton of one-punch power. I mean, he can be dangerous at times. It's possible. But overall, De Lima is a much more explosive and dangerous guy on the feet, and I believe De Lima has the better wrestling as well. So if things aren't going well against Picots on the feet for some reason, then De Lima can always just take him down, and De Lima should have the better submission game as well. So Igor Picots is definitely on his last legs. He's 35 years old. I'm really surprised that he's even in the UFC at this point, but with such lack of depth in the light heavyweight and heavyweight divisions, you're going to see some of these guys stick around a little bit longer than you expect. And Picots, maybe as being such a long-time veteran, maybe earned one last fight. And I don't think it ends well for him. De Lima is very dangerous, and I wouldn't be surprised one bit to see De Lima pull off a pretty dominant knockout or submission early in the fight. So my pick is going to be Marcos De Lima. Now, kicking off the main card, we have Daniel Sarafian, who is 9-5, taking on Antonio Junior Alpha dos Santos, who is 6-1, and this bout will be contested in the middleweight division this time. So, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Well, I've been Sarafian -170 to come back on Dos Santos Jr. +130. This is a line that's actually staying exactly still. I think there's a lot of people that probably want to avoid this fight, and I don't blame them at all. I mean, it's kind of a tricky one because, well, first of all, as Brian just mentioned, Sarafian's coming back up to the middleweight weight class where he took an experiment, I guess you could say, dropped down to 170. Didn't fare too well for him. I mean, as he got submitted quick-like by Kunimoto. So he's back up to 185 now. Of course, Dos Santos Jr. taking this fight on short notice, which, of course, kind of has a little bit of impact on this fight. Sarafian was originally supposed to fight Dan Miller. Unfortunately, Dan Miller couldn't make it, so now Dos Santos gets his shot in the UFC. Now, he is a hyped prospect, Dos Santos Jr. for sure. He's a former Jungle Fight middleweight champion. He's again, a striking-based fighter, solid Muay Thai skills for sure, utilizes strong kicking game. I mean, that's one of the most impressive things about Dos Santos Jr. for sure. And he's a powerful middleweight. He's got ability to knock you out, both the hands and the feet, so he's dangerous everywhere in the stand-up, department for sure. But there is some question marks around him as well. His not sub defense, his stand-up defense alone, he does get hit, defensively, it is a little bit of a concern for him. And Sarafian, even though Dos Santos Jr. has the pure striking edge in this fight, Sarafian does pack a punch. He's got some power to go along with it. So, Dos Santos Jr. definitely has to be careful, especially if he fades as the fight goes on a little bit, because Sarafian, even though he's more known again for kind of being a grinder, he's got some power and he could, end things early for Dos Santos Jr. as well. And also, on the ground, there's some question marks with Dos Santos Jr. I mean, he does seem to have a decent, well-rounded skill set, but I mean, there's some still question marks about his overall ground game and his ground defense as well. It's Sarafian, that he's going to come to fight here. He's going to push the pace and look to get the fight up against the cage and again, look for some takedowns, get top position here as well, and kind of just grind out and do what he does best and grind out Dos Santos Jr. So question marks all around this fight. I think the younger, fresher fighter again in that scenario is definitely Dos Santos Jr. It does worry me that he's coming in on short notice a little bit. This is another spot that I've been kind of bouncing back and forth on. I think it's a dog or pass situation for sure as far as betting goes. But as far as a pure pick goes, I almost want to go with the experienced veteran in this spot because Sarafian has been there, done that kind of. I know, again, he's didn't look that hot against Kunamoto for sure. Against Ferreira, the fight before that, actually, and it was at 185, he did do fairly well. I mean, he hung in there and made it a very close competitive fight. So Sarafian's been in some wars and he knows what it's all about. And I think he should be able to kind of withstand what Dos Santos Jr. has to throw at him. But with the weight bouncing back and forth a little bit, I'm not so sure. He can't be really that confident. So this is another spot where make sure you check out the, staff pick section of MMA Oddsbreaker. But for right now, I guess I'm going to lean a little bit more towards Sarafian, because again, the short notice for Dos Santos Jr., but make no mistake, I think Dos Santos Jr. is definitely the more dangerous fighter, and I wouldn't be shocked if he gets a W here, but my official pick right now is going to be Sarafian.
Yeah, and something interesting, Dos Santos Jr. is a very dangerous guy, being a very talented stand-up artist, very good kickboxer. He was the Jungle Fight middleweight champion for a reason, but in this case, I think the short notice is definitely going to be to his detriment. I mean, I was very, very interested in picking him because of just how scary this guy can be, but Sarafian does have some really good wrestling. He has some solid takedowns and top position and jiu-jitsu, and which actually made his last fight just shocking to me that he was submitted so easily by Kichi Kunamoto. So maybe returning back to middleweight will be much better off for him because he was a very competitive in the middleweight division against the likes of, Cesar Mutanch and CB Dollaway, even in losing efforts. I think that this time around, if he can implement that wrestling and top control, then he can definitely walk away with a decision, maybe even submit his opponent. But the one thing to be concerned about is I don't think Sarafian has the best chin, and his stand-up still is definitely a work in progress. He has some power, but, he got rocked by CB Dollaway, although he also dished out a rocking as well. But against somebody that's as technical and dangerous on the feet as Dos Santos Jr., Sarafian could definitely be in trouble if he does not close the distance and try to either get this fight to the clinch or drag it to the ground. Dos Santos Jr. has a really, really good use of kicks and punches, and especially from distance. So Sarafian needs to take those weapons away from him. And if he can do that, if he can get top position, then he'll be fine. He also has to be careful about getting swept because Dos Santos Jr. is very dangerous from top position. He has really good ground and pound. So this is a very dangerous fight, especially with a late opponent change. But in my opinion, as long as Sarafian doesn't get blown out right away in the first round, then he will at least win a decision. So my pick is going to be Daniel Sarafian, but I am not crazy confident about it because he just has not lived up to all that hype that was surrounding him after The Ultimate Fighter Season 1 ended. Now, moving on and dropping down to the welterweight division, we have Eric Silva, who is 16-5 with 1 no contest, taking on Mike Rhodes, who is 6-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Silva minus 400, the comeback on Rhodes plus 280, and this line right now is minus 420 plus 335. Again, another line that's been out for a little while, so we've got to see it kind of settle, and other sportsbooks have since copied and posted lines as well, and it's around 4-1 ballpark everywhere. You know what? Obviously, it's Silva's fight to win or lose. I mean, the guy is just offensively, there's not too many more at 170 that's better. I mean, he can submit you quick like. I mean, he's got a devastating submission game. He's got crazy knockout power on the feet. And he's got decent wrestling to go along with it. So Silva's the total package offensively. I mean, he could get a little bit more technical. He tends to get a little bit wild at times, no doubt about that. But I mean, as far as what he can dish out, wow. I mean, there's not too many people that can withstand Silva's offensive attack. Rhodes is going to have to weather an early storm if he's going to be successful in this fight because Silva's going to bring it for sure. I actually was impressed, even though he lost that fight, his last fight in a war, one of the best fights I've seen in a long time against Matt Brown. Silva showed a lot of heart, a lot of toughness. He didn't want to lose that fight. He was there to win that fight. And that's impressive because, at times when people get tired, there's a lot of quit in people. And Silva definitely showed me that he has, the no quit type of factor in him, which is good to see. But the problem is with Silva, he's still defensively flawed a little bit. I mean, he can get hit on the feet. His chin overall is pretty solid, but he has been, caught now and knocked out. So that's a little scary, in some ways, because, you can get through his offensive attack. You can end up landing on him. You never know. And the problem, what bothers me the most about Silva is definitely his cardio. He does have a tendency to slow down every fight in round 2 and round 3 if it gets that far. And then you could take advantage of that. So I think Rhodes, I don't see him having too much success in this fight because Rhodes is typically your striking-based fighter as well. I mean, he trains out of Rufus-Sport. We all know that. So he's got a good environment, good gym. I know there's a lot of heat on Rufus-Sport right now, but I'm talking about the pure striking training. He should be ready for what Silva has to offer. But that being said, I mean, Rhodes, I don't know if he can weather the early storm. I mean, Silva can jump on him early. He can knock him out. I think Silva has, again, the possibility of getting a quick sub on Rhodes as well, getting him to the ground and taking advantage of that spot. So I think more times than not, Silva ends up finishing Rhodes. Rhodes has shown a pretty decent skill set even on the ground. I mean, he's got some underrated wrestling. He's got some good takedown defense overall. So he's a pretty well-rounded guy and probably flying underneath everybody's radar here, but it's just such a weird spot for him because, again, Silva just outclasses him in several areas here. I mean, I think the only way Rhodes wins this fight, seriously, if he does hang on early on and then come back and win round 2 in a close competitive round and then puts it on Silva in round 3 as well and maybe gets the KO, breaks through that flawed defensive Silva and knocks him out along the way. So he does have a way to win this fight, so can't count him out completely. I know a lot of people are going to be putting Silva in parlays here. I would be cautious in this spot for sure because, of course, it's kind of a no-brainer again. All of us expect Silva to be a little bit too much for Rhodes, but man, there's just so many defensive flaws against Silva that you got to be cautious in this spot. So my official pick is going to be Silva. I do think he probably gets the job done and, within the first round more than likely. But beyond that, it's kind of a head scratcher and just, it's just shame really that Silva, he has those kind of flaws because, offensively, this guy's good enough to definitely be the 170 pound champion, but all those other flaws are definitely holding him back. So my official pick is Silva to win this fight though.
I'm cautiously optimistic about Eric Silva's chances in this fight, but there's so many flaws about him that definitely do scare you. The main thing, of course, is the conditioning. We've seen multiple times now that if he does not get that really quick finish, he definitely runs into some trouble. We saw against Dong Hyun Kim where, he got knocked out in the second round after a really strong, crazy start of a brawl. Same thing with Matt Brown. He almost got that submission early in the fight and then just got beat up over the course of the fight and then ended up getting finished with a TKO. And it's just come up time and time and time again. This guy is so dangerous early in the fight. He lives up to all the hype. If he can go in there and just take you out right away with that early knockout or early submission, but if he doesn't get it, it's very difficult for him to win a decision because he does slow down so much. So in this fight, it could happen. Mike Rhodes has gone in there against a big hyped prospect in the past and got steamrolled. Look at his RFA fight against Brandon Thatch. He got hit real hard and then submitted. So that could totally happen here. But if Mike Rhodes weathers this storm that is Eric Silva, then he could totally come on strong in the second and third rounds and walk away with a decision, maybe even a TKO. He doesn't kind of have that power to get a TKO against somebody like Silva, but if Silva, isn't able to respond to strikes, then it could happen. But that being said, Eric Silva is so dangerous in that first round. He's going to be coming out like a shot out of a cannon. He hits incredibly hard, about as hard as anybody in the welterweight division, and his submission game is fantastic. So if Mike Rhodes gives up anything, he's going to dive for it, and he's going to be very aggressive about it. This guy is a finisher, and as if he latches onto something, I can totally see Mike Rhodes getting finished in the first round. But if it doesn't happen, you gotta be careful. So maybe this could be a live betting situation where if Silva wins the first round convincingly and looks like he's starting to fade, maybe, give a little bit of, toss a little something on Mike Rhodes, in between the first and second rounds. But, my pick at this point is gonna be Eric Silva. Mike Rhodes just hasn't looked that great in the UFC so far. We really expected a lot more out of him, and in my opinion, this is his toughest fight of his 3 fights in the UFC, And Eric Silva definitely has a good chance of walking away with a finish here, so I'm going to pick him. Now, moving down to the lightweight division, we have Elias Silverio, who is 11-0, taking on Rashid Magomedov, who is 17-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I put Magomedov minus 125, the comeback on Silverio minus 115. So virtually pick him with a slight lean towards Magomedov here. Early action has come in. Again, that's another line that's been out for a while, so it has settled and more sportsbooks are up with it. Right now it's Magomedov minus 160, the comeback on Silverio is plus 140. So obviously more people are favoring Magomedov in this spot. I'm not too sure. I think this is a spot that people have to kind of look a little bit closer and see. I know Magomedov has an extremely talented striking game overall, and he's a hard guy to deal with as far as taking him down, controlling him on the ground. He's definitely improving in that area for sure. But that being said, I think the way these guys match up, Silverio is not by any means a weak striker in his own right. So you basically have two strikers going at it, with Magomedov definitely being the more flashy, more capable striker. I do like his striking style a little bit better than Silverio here. But at the same time, Silverio's a tough guy. He's going to be aggressive enough to be pushing a pace as well. I think Silverio's probably going to end up clinching up against the cage with Magomedov, trying to control him in that aspect of the game, and then maybe getting a takedown or two. Because one thing that is extremely underrated for Silverio, being more known as honestly a striker, is his ground game. I mean, he does have some decent wrestling. He's able in more times than not, I should say, excuse me. He's able to get the fight to the floor when he tries. He's very successful at doing that. And once he gets on top, he has good top control as well. Now, Magomedov is one of these guys that, again, I said it earlier, he's very hard to control on the ground. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Silverio does struggle to keep Magomedov on the ground. But you got to factor in, if the strike is going to be close, you give an edge to Magomedov. Silverio's cage presence, when he pushes you up against the cage, when he tries to scramble for a quick takedown and maybe lands one and Magomedov kind of bounces back up to the feet, I think that's going to be scoring some points along the way for Silverio. So I'm expecting this to be a back and forth war. Both these guys are talented enough and have enough knockout power that sure, they can actually finish each other, no doubt about it. So I wouldn't be shocked if, one of these guys lands something clean and just puts the other one out. But that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a very competitive, close-fought, hard war type of decision as well. And if that's the case, I got to lean with Silverio a little bit, because I think, again, he's kind of the better grinder of the two, and I think he's going to be able to at least hang with Magomedov on the feet as well. So I think there's more ways to win it for Silverio here, and at plus 140, there very well could be some value on the underdog here. Being that it's in Brazil, I mean, I know sometimes the hometown type of stuff doesn't come into play as much with the judges because they're just awful across the board, but at the same time, you got to look at it. It can't hurt him with the Brazilian crowd being a little bit more behind Silverio. So I'm going to lean that way. He's my official pick, and I think there could very well be some dog value on him as well.
And while I understand the Silverio pick, especially now that the line has started to move, I'm going to slightly lean the other way. Magomedov, in my opinion, is a little bit of a better technical striker than Silverio. He does a lot of things right. He has some good combinations, some decent counter-striking ability, and he measures himself well. That might come into play here in the negative side, because maybe Silverio will push a little bit of a higher pace and throw with higher volume. So that is a bit of a concern, but I do like Magomedov in a pure strike for strike scenario on the feet. Now, that being said, in terms of on the ground, Magomedov is a more defensive on the ground rather than offensive, and Silverio is definitely the more aggressive wrestler, more aggressive with the ground game in terms of looking for submissions and trying to get top position and ground and pound. So I think that is to Silverio's advantage there, but in terms of pure stand-up ability, if Magomedov's able to keep this fight on the feet, turn it into a stand-up war, in my opinion, Magomedov might and should have a slight advantage. This is more of a situation where it's a 52 to 48% type of thing. So at pick'em odds, I totally would have liked Magomedov, but now that the betting line has, shifted towards Magomedov's favor, I can completely understand that the underdog has more value. But in terms of pure pick, I really do think that Magomedov on the feet should have the advantage, and I think that this fight will most likely be contested on the feet. Magomedov definitely has some good jabs and good overall striking instincts, and he could make things a bit of a pain for Silverio in the stand-up department because Silverio is a little bit more raw there. So I really feel like the technical striking of Magomedov will shine here. So I'm going to pick him. Not crazy confident about it, and I don't see a lot of value at this point. Now moving all the way up to the light heavyweight division, we have Ultimate Fighter Brazil Season 3 winner Antonio Carlos Jr., who is 5-0, taking on Patrick Cummins, who is 6-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Cummins minus 245 to come back on Antonio Carlos Jr. I'm sorry. It was plus 175. Now, surprisingly to me, the early action did come in on underdog Antonio Carlos Jr. The line is all the way down at the time of the recording to minus 155. The comeback is plus 135. So dog action coming in, and I do think it's the right way, honestly, here in this spot. Cummins is one of those guys that kind of has that wrestler's hype, in my opinion, even against Daniel Cormier. If you look at which way the action went, a lot of people were backing Cummins in that fight as well. So when I opened this line, honestly, I figured that the popular guy, the more likable guy in this spot would probably be Cummins, and I was surprised with the early dog action. But again, hats off to you guys that hopped on that early plus 175 line, because it's far from gone now. We could see the line climb back up towards Cummins as the fight gets a little bit closer, because I do think he's kind of got that wrestler's hype behind him. But as far as the pure matchup goes, I think it is a dog or pass situation here with Antonio Carlos Jr. because, man, I think that he's young. He's only 24 years old. He's still developing his overall skill set. With Cummins, he's 34 years old. I mean, he's getting better too, but I think there's definitely more upside to Carlos Jr. here, because I think that he's also a physically strong fighter for the weight class. And he's got a little bit of advantages, I think, over Cummins on the feet. Cummins looked pretty good, I gotta say. And his performance in his last fight against Kyle Kingsbury, he looked really good, and he kept up that pace. I mean, he just destroyed Kingsbury basically for 3 rounds. It wasn't a questionable decision at all. So he looked impressive. He was able to maintain that pace, and he definitely deserved the nod there. So to me, that's an improvement in Cummins' overall game. But I think that Carlos Jr. is definitely a tougher test right now than a guy like Kingsbury. I think Kingsbury is obviously on the kind of towards the end of his career there, where Carlos Jr. is just kind of starting out, and I think we're going to see him get better and better fight by fight here. So even though Cummins does have the pure power advantage, I think he's got the wrestler's advantage for sure. I think he's going to struggle to get Jr. on the floor here. And if he does, he's going to probably have some trouble on the feet with Carlos Jr. I think that we're going to probably see Jr. landing the more effective strikes in this spot. Cummins, to me, has a suspect chin, and his strike defense is definitely questionable. And I think we might see Carlos Jr. exposing that at some point here as well. So I think there's a lot to like about Carlos Jr. in this spot. I think Cummins, the hype on him is a little bit overrated, and I think he's going to be kind of coming back down to reality here against Carlos Jr. So I think that if it hits the scorecards, it's going to be a really close type of decision. So there is possibly dog value there. And if it doesn't hit the scorecards, if there is a finish in this fight, I think it's actually going to be Carlos Jr. getting the nod there as well. So he's got the better BJJ game, obviously, the pure submission game. It's going to be hard to submit Cummins, but I do think that it's possible. And I think on the feet, again, he's got more of a puncher's chance, and he can knock Cummins out as well. So the only way I really see Cummins winning this fight is probably on the scorecards, but even then it's going to be really close. So my official pick is going to be Carlos Jr. to pull off the upset win over Cummins. I think he does have more ways to win a fight, and more times than not, he's probably going to come through.
And I'm going to come in on the other side. Antonio Carlos Jr., in my opinion, is a little bit more well-rounded overall than Cummins. Now, Cummins is dangerous. You saw in that Kyle Kingsbury fight, he can definitely put a whooping on somebody over the course of 15 minutes, so I don't think that cardio will be an issue. But what really impressed me with Carlos Jr. is I think this guy is well-rounded. He has a solid overall submission game. His striking is a work in progress, but definitely coming along very nicely. And overall, I think if this fight stays standing, Carlos Jr. definitely has a good solid edge. And if this fight goes to the ground, Carlos Jr. has a solid submission game and a sweep game, and he could absolutely pull off something against Cummins, because Cummins is definitely a bit raw. He is definitely that nose to the grindstone, get a ton of takedowns and just start wailing on your opponent with ground and pound type of guy. That's what Pat Cummins is, because on the feet he is a bit of a fish out of the water. He has some power, but he does not have a great chin, and if Carlos Jr. can really crack him with something, he could be in some big, big trouble. So, overall, I do like Carlos Jr. to walk away with this one. The only thing that concerns me is if Cummins is able to repeatedly get takedowns, and if Carlos Jr. isn't able to get back to his feet, because that is very draining to have somebody big and strong like that on top of you. And if Carlos Jr. is able to get back to his feet, it could be very draining for Cummins to have to repeatedly try to take somebody down. So it's a very interesting dynamic of how this fight plays out, deciding whether or not Cummins or Carlos Jr. is going to walk away with it. So I'm leaning with Carlos Jr. mainly because of all the other facets of his game, but I could totally see Patrick Cummins grinding it out. All in all, I am going to side with the Brazilian in Brazil. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening and dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have former champion Renan Barão, who is 34-2 with 1 no contest, taking on Mitch Gagnon, who is 12-2. Now Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Barão minus 705 to come back on Gagnon, plus 435, and right now looking over at the line of 5 dimes, it's Barão minus 750 to come back on Gagnon is plus 525. So, not a lot of movement, early support coming in, actually both ways. The line, went back and forth a little bit. Now it's starting to escalate a little bit more because of parlay action, I'm sure, for Barão, and I can understand that as well because it's not a huge surprise to me at all. It's just a tough matchup. I mean, you got the former dominant champion. I mean, a little while back here, before his loss to Dillashaw, he was pound for pound, I mean, at the top of everybody's list, and in consideration for being the number 1 pound for pounder fighter in the world. That's how good this guy is. So Barão, he had a setback against Dillashaw. That was a war. That was an entertaining fight. But here he's definitely getting an easier fight, a matchup that he should be able to win. Cause, you know, Mitch has a lot of good things going for him. I mean, he's definitely, a very powerful, stocky, capable grappler in most parts, as far as getting the fight to the floor. And then, I mean, he grabs your neck. I mean, he can end a fight quickly. He's got a little bit of power in the feet. He is a southpaw. So I think I respect Mitch Gagnon for sure. I think overall, with his skill set and his improvement level, and he's been on quite a roll, I think, since his first setback actually to Carero. I think he's on a 4-fight winning streak, if I'm not mistaken, and he's been impressive, and he seems to get better with every fight. So there's a lot of good things about Mitch for sure, but I just think here, I just don't see how he beats Barão. I don't think he's going to be able to get the fight to the floor, and on the feet, I mean, technically speaking, Barão has a huge advantage. I mean, he should be, the better striker overall. He's got nasty kicks. He's got obviously good hands to go along with it. So he's going to have, the reach advantage. And I just think Gagnon's going to have trouble closing the gap and being effective in this fight completely. And if he does take Barão down and he's able to do that, he's going to have some problems there as well, because Barão is just a stud on the ground. Off his back, he's got a good guard game. He can submit a lot of guys there too as well. So regardless of where the fight takes place, I think Mitch is going to have to kind of land that kind of crazy puncher's chance type of knockout to win the fight. I think that's really the only thing he's got. Or unless he stuns Barão real quick and hops on and, grabs his neck and chokes him out, because he's definitely strong enough. When he has that grip around your neck, there's not much you can do. So I don't think that'll happen. I think more than likely everybody's correct, and the parlay action that comes in on Barão is probably going to be successful here, because Barão's just a stud. He's going to get this W here and probably be right back in the mix for his title. So you definitely know he's motivated, and again, he's going to come to fight here. He's going to probably want to prove a point. So unfortunately for Mitch, it's just a bad stylistic matchup for him. And I'm sure he'll bounce back after this loss eventually and, maybe make another run towards the title. But for right now, I just think it's Barão's fight to win or lose, and he's just a level above Mitch for sure.
And I completely agree. This just is awkward matchmaking to me, because Mitch Gagnon's been on a nice little run here. He's been scoring some very impressive victories ever since that loss to Brian Caraway. And it seems like he's really been working so hard on fixing all the little things that were wrong with his game. His stand-up has become a lot more crisp and fluid instead of stiff and robotic. And his conditioning, which originally was only about good enough for 1 round, it actually is significantly improved. He can go all 3 rounds now. So he's becoming a much more complete mixed martial artist and living up to that hype that was around him as he made his UFC debut. So it's just so perplexing that just as he's really seeming to get a lot of momentum, they match him with the former champion in Renan Barão's comeback fight to try to prove that he deserves another shot at the belt. And, you know, I would have much rather liked to see Mitch Gagnon against somebody a little closer to his level, because he's ranked like number 14 right now. So it seems a little unfair, especially in Brazil. Renan Barão is going to be insanely motivated. And on paper, Barão has a huge advantage here. He's definitely going to be better on the feet. He has really good power on the feet. I think Barão's conditioning is going to be just fine. Barão's ground game is possibly the best in terms of submissions in the bantamweight division, which is a huge detriment to Mitch Gagnon because that's how he finishes almost every single one of his victories. He usually would tap out his opponent in the first round. And there is just no way that Mitch Gagnon is going to tap out Renan Barão. I don't think anyone can tap out Renan Barão unless they completely knock him out cold and then latch on a rear naked choke while he's unconscious. Like, it's just not going to happen. And so, like, Mitch's path to victory is so slim here because on the feet, Barão should be better. He should have some good leg kicks. He should be longer and definitely more technical. And on the ground, maybe Mitch is a little bit stronger physically. Maybe his wrestling is slightly better, but Barão's takedown defense is spectacular, and Barão's transitions and everything on the ground is unbelievable. This guy can sneak onto your back from at any moment. He's incredibly opportunistic, and I just do not see a way for Mitch Gagnon to win this, barring a really lucky punch. And even then, it's going to be really difficult because Renan Barão's tough. He's not the type of guy that goes down from one strike. I mean, it's an accumulation of strike. It took 5 rounds of strikes for him to finally go down against Dillashaw. And unfortunately, at this point in his career, Mitch Gagnon is not TJ Dillashaw. So I got to side with Renan Barão. I think he wins convincingly, and hopefully they give Mitch Gagnon a bit of an easier test his next time around. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, while I'm in agreement with you guys, it is interesting that the numbers make it look a little bit more even, but that comes with a big, big caveat. These guys have not been facing the same level of talent in the last few fights. Think about Renan Barão going many rounds with Uriah Faber. He's been in there with Michael McDonald, Eddie Wineland, and then 5 rounds with TJ Dillashaw, ultimately losing. That is way more impressive than the last few wins that Mitch Gagnon has. Now, 4 wins in that division is still an impressive win streak, but you look at his wins, I mean, 12 wins, 11 by submission. That is, that's pretty ridiculous, especially given that he's listed as only a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. He is not going to get that opportunity against Barão. You guys have said it. It's just way too much of a leap. So if you eliminate that as his only route to victory, what is he left to do? He's left to stand and trade with Barão. Now Barão, surprisingly, far more experienced, and yet he is the younger fighter here. He's also the longer fighter. Gagnon is listed as a southpaw. That gives him a slight advantage, but Barão is his stand-up striking is phenomenal, and he chooses to keep fights on the feet and bang it out. He's very much a mini Jose Aldo in that respect. So you can't take him down because his takedown defense is very, very good. You're forced to stand and trade with him, and I just don't think that Gagnon has the combinations or the power, really just the technical striking required to go toe-to-toe with Renan Barão round after round. On paper, Gagnon's numbers are pretty good in terms of his striking stats. It's just that they're not from spending very much time there. I mean, this is a fairly limited data set in terms of he's had a few short fights that ended early with submissions. He just doesn't spend a lot of time on his feet, and so it's really suspect to trust those numbers in the sense that he can hang with one of the most notorious strikers around. So I do expect this to stay standing for a bit. I do expect Barão to be obviously winning the exchanges, and then it's a question of when, not if, Barão can get a finish. That part is the more difficult thing to game here. These are bantamweights. Barão, he does have power. It's not exceptional power. So if there's a bit of a grappling war and position war, it might take some time here actually for the fight to develop. So I would not be too eager to jump on a tight rounds limit, like one and a half rounds, going for the under. It may take some time, so I'd be looking at different angles given the steep prices here.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, moving on to the main event of the evening, we have another former light heavyweight champion, Lyoto Machida, taking on CB Dollaway. Machida is 21-5 overall, while Dollaway is 16-6, and this is in the middleweight division. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, I opened Machida minus 600 to come back on Dollaway plus 400. Line staying steady right now. It's minus 600 plus 450. So it just got a little bit tighter, but there was some early movement back and forth on this one as well. So some support coming in on Dollaway and some support back on Machida. I mean, the line's high for a reason, obviously. Dollaway, you gotta respect what the guy's accomplished lately. I mean, he's been on a heck of a run. He's proven a lot of people wrong recently that countered him out against just his last fight against Carmont. How impressive was that, really? And the guy is such a well-rounded fighter overall. Offensively, he's dangerous in all aspects of the game. I mean, Dollaway has good wrestling. He's got good submissions. When he wants to use them and implement them, of course. And, he even has some knockout power and some decent striking on the feet. Unfortunately for him though, Machida has good takedown defense and Machida's a far better striker. So Dollaway's going to need to kind of smother and grind out Machida along the way here to win this fight, I think, unless he catches him on the feet Dollaway does have a little bit underrated power. So it's another one of those scenarios that we were just talking about where it's going to have to be kind of a lucky type of punch, or a flukish type thing, I think, for Dollaway to win this fight on the feet. Machida has been caught before, so it wouldn't be, I guess, out of the realm for him to get caught again. But at the same time, I mean, Machida, technically speaking, he's just a stud. I mean, he moves well. He's going to be hard for Dollaway to kind of close the gap and do what he needs to do here against Machida. I think Machida's going to be, again, the far more technical striker. He's getting improved in all areas, really. I mean, since he's dropped down to 185, he's looked that much better, and he was obviously a former champion at 205. So in his fight against Weidman, I think he performed really well, a lot better than most people thought there as well. He made it interesting. He made it tough. And this is a big step down in competition for Machida as well. I think Machida, I mean, if you're talking about, a lot of people say in the heavyweight division, Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos is basically like champion in 1A. I think you got almost the same scenario here, at middleweight with Weidman being the champion and Machida's like 1A. That's how good he is. So he's right there. Top 2 or 3 fighters in the world. The only question mark behind Machida for me is his age. He's getting to be a little bit older now. He's 36 years old. So, I mean, it could be possible that eventually we see Machida just all of a sudden hit that decline spot and he just doesn't look the same. I mean, it doesn't look like it's his time yet because he's looked nothing but, fantastic at 185. So I don't think he's at that point in his career. We have to worry about it much. But that being said, it is in the back of my mind a little bit with Machida, and Dollaway has momentum on his side as well. He's got confidence on his side. And I don't think he's going to be intimidated by fighting in Brazil, of course, obviously, against Machida either. So Dollaway definitely can be respectable in this fight, but I just think eventually Machida is going to land that knockout punch. Dollaway has been knocked out a couple times, and I mean, Machida, like I said, I think he's kind of peaking in his career, minus the age factor here. I think it's the best that we've ever seen Machida perform, and I think he's going to continue that. So eventually we're going to see Machida, I think, finish Dollaway and get the knockout win here. That's my pick. And as far as the bet goes, it is tricky a little bit at the current line because, I mean, laying 600, there's not really too much value on, as far as a pure bet goes, but I know everybody's going to parlay Machida, and realistically it should be a spot you should win.
This one is a little crazy to me because CB Dollaway is actually fighting the best he's ever fought in his entire career. His striking defense has improved. His overall offensive boxing has gotten significantly better. He's throwing much more accurately and much more dangerously. And he's been mixing in his takedowns as well. So he is becoming a really solid, well-rounded mixed martial artist. It took him a little while. I mean, he had a really rough stretch there at one point, but he's finally started to turn it around. And, as you saw, that early knockout of Cesar Ferreira and the beautiful, performance against Carmont in one of his last fights there with, mixing in the takedowns and then landing some big shots on the feet. But Lyoto Machida is just on a whole nother level. This is going to be so difficult for Dollaway because I have a lot of trouble seeing Dollaway being able to take Machida down because Machida is so good at using his distance, factoring in range, staying back, and it's going to be very difficult for Dollaway to get inside on him. It's going to be difficult for Dollaway to just hit him, whether alone, to take him down. And Machida is so accurate and so explosive where he can just dart forward like a rattlesnake striking, and CB Dollaway's chin is just not that good. Obviously, we've seen him get knocked out a couple times already, but, I mean, it's not just the knockouts, it's the knockdowns. He's been dropped multiple times throughout his career and been able to recover. And against Lyoto Machida, you just can't afford to get hurt like that because he has a great killer instinct, and when he hurts you, he pounces, and you're in big trouble. Honestly, at some point in this fight, CB Dollaway is going to get over-aggressive, and Ryan Bader himself just walk right into a really good jab from Machida, and he's gonna go down. Dollaway's chin just cannot hold up to the accuracy of Machida, and Machida is probably going to win this fight convincingly by knockout, and I wouldn't be surprised if it happens in the first round. Dollaway needs to keep this fight in the clinch at all times, make it super ugly, and I just can't see him being able to pull that off over the course of 3 rounds against someone as elusive as Machida. So my pick absolutely is Lyoto Machida. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they agree. I mean, you look at Lyoto Machida's stat line, and his striking metrics are just absolutely outstanding. Extremely accurate, one of the most dangerous strikers in UFC history, if not the most, on a punch-for-punch, pound-for-pound basis. And that's some analysis I actually did a while back, and that was before he scored some pretty brutal knockouts since then. So we also talk about his elusiveness. 81% head strike defense is abnormally good, and again, that's having faced champions. So this guy's stand-up is off the charts. Now, his one criticism there is his pace. And while the stat line actually has them as even in terms of their volume ratio, Machida has forced fights to operate at a very slow pace in stand-up. He only averages about 5 strikes attempts per minute while he's standing, which is abnormally low. CB Dollaway nearly twice that amount. And yet they've both actually matched their opponents in their overall pace. So that means Machida is setting the pace of his fights. He's slowing other fighters down. And Dollaway is, more engaging with the fighters at a normal pace. So Dollaway, while his power is okay and his accuracy is okay, his defense is really bad. I mean, he allows himself to get hit, and on a punch-for-punch basis, again, correcting that, Dollaway's chin is actually a little bit worse than Machida, despite the fact that, as you mentioned, Machida is getting older. He has been in some wars, and it will take a toll. Dollaway is already below that, and even though he's younger. So again, if this stands up, it's only a matter of time. I do believe that Machida will find his target, and he will put Dollaway away. Now, Dollaway, if he tries to wrestle, plenty of people have tried that against Machida. They haven't been very successful. Phil Davis did it, but again, that's a weight class up, much longer arms from that guy than Dollaway has. So Machida's takedown defense is still very, very good at 79%. That's way above average. He stayed off his back. He's also a black belt. That is something to deal with. I'm not sure if a wrestler like Dollaway really wants to test his submission defense against Machida. But he has to fight this fight somewhere, so he's probably going to be very aggressive, and I think that's just going to play right into Machida's counter strikes. So, given where the price is, obviously it's not like you can just throw a lot of money down on Machida. It's more of maybe a totals play or an inside the distance prop for Machida. I think that's probably the better value play.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 58. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. And if you'd like to be an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member, you can sign up right now and make sure to check out our holiday sale. It's on the front page of MMAOddsBreaker.com, top right corner. You can sign up for a big discount. Now, if we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.